David, let me start with you. And this tweet from Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, he just tweeted this. Let's put it up. The U.S.'s act of international terrorism, targeting and assassinating General Soleimani, the most effective force fighting Daesh, ISIS, al-Nusra, and al-Qaeda, is extremely dangerous and a foolish escalation. The U.S. bears responsibility for all consequences of its rogue adventurism. David, what's your reaction?
Well, not a particular surprise. The last time that Minister Zarif was in New York a few months ago, he actually talked with us at some length about his relationship with General Soleimani and maintained that the foreign policy he was developing for Iran worked hand in glove with Soleimani's acts. And that's what worries American officials, because there's no question that General Soleimani was responsible for the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans, was the man who propped up Bashar Assad, and who was trying to foment a lot of the uprisings in Iraq. And there are going to be many in Iraq who are going to probably celebrate his death. But for the administration, this was a pretty risky escalation. And I think the big question is, since the United States certainly had plenty of opportunities to kill him in the past, why did they choose to do this now, if in fact they chose to do it? That, in other words, if they knew that he was going to be in that motorcade that was out near the Baghdad airport. And we don't know for sure whether or not they knew that Soleimani would be in that.
The statement from the Pentagon tonight, General Hertling, says that General Soleimani was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region. Does the Pentagon, does the president have a responsibility now to kind of flesh that out some, to offer more details potentially?
Well, not really, Victor. If we're talking about intelligence information that's going to provide the requirement for a preemptive strike, the Pentagon, the Department of Defense have been watching the actions of the Iranian Quds Force over the last year plus, but specifically over the last couple of months, because there have been indicators that they were conducting the various attacks throughout Iraq against American forces and the Iraqi security forces. So if there was an indicator that there were going to be some type of attack, again, a massive attack after the Baghdad riots that occurred against our embassy the other day, a preemptory strike is appropriate. Now, having said that, Soleimani is a ruthless killer. He's a horrible human being, and at the same time, he is a very charismatic soldier to his forces. This is a guy that when I was in Iraq, my last tour there in 2007 and 2008, because of the kinds of things that were going on against the Iranian-Iraqi border, I had a chance to look at his biographical profile that one of my intelligence guys presented to me. He's a fascinating character. He commanded a division in the Iran-Iraq war in the late 80s. He's been in combat his entire life. His soldiers love him. He's a quiet, charismatic guy, a strategic genius, and a tactical operator. So these are all the kinds of things, looking at him from the enemy perspective, it's going to create a great deal of angst in this part of the world. David was absolutely right. There are going to be some in Baghdad that are very happy, even Shia, that are going to be very happy that Soleimani is dead, but there's going to be just as many, perhaps even more, that are going to be very upset about it. It's 7 a.m. in Baghdad right now. In a few hours, most of the people in the city are going to be going to the mosque, and they're going to be hearing one way or another from their imams about what to do next. We'll see on the streets today the kind of anger that's going to be generated by many of the pro-Iranian Shia that are inside of the capital city of Baghdad.
And Phil, that's an important point. What we heard from this statement, again, that's all we have from the Pentagon. The only thing we have from the White House is a tweet of an American flag from the president. That the Pentagon says this attack was to prevent or deter future attacks. So we'll see what Iran's response is. But what do you think that the U.S. should prepare for as a form of retaliation by Iran?
Well, I think if you're thinking about whether this would deter an attack by Iran, I think the prospect of that is zero. Look, we have a simmering, or we had until a few hours ago, a simmering conflict with Iran that included things like attacks in Iraq, but also remember Iran was picking up ships in the Persian Gulf going back a few months. We've decided to take a simmering relationship into a boiling relationship. The Iranians, and I followed them when I was at the CIA. One of my responsibilities was looking at the Iranian Special Services, their intelligence and Quds Force, this sort of external military force they have. They are very aggressive and they are fearless. One thing I want to tell you, Victor, is this is not just a general. This is somebody who's been with the Iranians since the revolution 41 years ago. This guy has been with the people who were the sponsors of the revolution in Iran. He is somebody who's a brother to the leadership of Iran. So they're looking at this not just as the elimination of a general, but as an opportunity to respond to an America that just decided they wanted to go from a simmer to a boil. My point is, whether you're at a diplomatic facility, a military facility, or some other entity, like a company affiliated with the United States in the Middle East, the Iranians are going to bring it hard and heavy. I'm going to tell you it's going to happen sometime within the next day or 2 weeks. They're not going to wait that long, and it is going to be ugly. Among all the things I've seen in 6 or 7 years, talking about national security on CNN, I know this one is hard to understand for people who don't do this for a living. This has to be one of the top things I have ever seen when I've been with this organization, CNN. This is profoundly significant for the Middle East, profoundly.
So, General, what's happening at the Pentagon right now? General Hertling, what should we expect from the U.S. moving forward?
Well, what I would be doing if I were back at the Pentagon, which I was when the 9/11 attacks happened, is you would not just be looking at this location, but you'd be looking at other parts of the world. Who else is going to take advantage of this? Is Kim now going to launch something and give us 2 parts of the world to look at? Is Russia going to broaden their adventurism and go into some nation state or go further into Ukraine? Is China going to attack our ships in the South China Sea? All of those things from a strategic perspective, the war planners are taking a look at and saying, where are we vulnerable? What might happen? At the same time, from a tactical perspective, some things have got to be gearing up in terms of messages to embassies where all our Marine Guards are saying, be ready for the kinds of attacks that we've seen in the past. When something like this goes down, where a lot of organizations are leaning forward and saying, where might I go next? What kind of things are going to occur in the Middle East, whether it's a soldier, a sailor, an airman, or Marine? What kind of homeland security measures do we have to take? Our Coast Guard, some of the DHS elements that are going to be put on high alert. I agree with Phil completely. This is one of those kind of things we're not sure what's going to happen exactly, but we've got to prepare for a lot of different things. The other thing I'd say, Iran is based on asymmetric warfare, much like the Russians are. The U.S. is based more on conventional and recently counterinsurgency. So we're going to be facing some asymmetric attacks wherever there are pro-Iranian forces throughout the Middle East. And those could be very small supported groups by Iran, or they could be the kinds of Iraqi groups that are supported by local politicians within Baghdad that lean toward Iran, that have Shia as their background and look at the Republican Guard. You're also going to see some attacks against some of our allies. Interesting to note, Victor, the Council of Foreign Relations put out a top 13 list for 2020 where we should expect attacks, and this, the kind of proxy war that we're looking at right now that we just turned up the heat on, was one of the top 5, either Iran against the United States or Iran against the ally of the United States. I think we're going to see a little bit of both, truthfully.
Well, we've already seen now the rhetorical response from Iran. We'll see as the day develops there in Iran what we'll see from both Iraq and Iran after this killing of this general. General Hertling, Phil Mudd, David Sanger, thank you all.